In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at how we can start building detailed character portraits. So to begin this lecture, we can start off by creating a new file. And this is actually going to be a slightly bigger canvas size than we've been using for our characters, just because we want to add in some more detail. So I'll actually make this a 32 by 32 size canvas. And just like we've been doing in most of our lectures, just make sure that you actually load up your color palette that we've been using for our character designs, just so we can keep the colors consistent. And I'll actually rename this layer to our character layer, which will be the only actual layer that we use before our challenge. But I will also create a new layer and just throw this by clicking on the layer and right clicking on the layer to move this down. And we'll be using this as our background layer later in this lecture. Okay, so we're good and ready to start, but we want to actually relate this to characters that we've created before. So one more thing that we'll do is we'll go up to the top left here, and we'll click File, and we'll go to Open, and it'll just find a character that I have used in the past just as a reference. So we'll use this platformer fighter character as a reference point for skin tones, eye color, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to grab the two skin colors, as that's mainly what we're going to be using in the lecture. And I'll head back over to my portrait layer, go over to this rectangle tool, or you can just press U on your keyboard shortcuts, and we'll be creating a 16 height by 24 size width rectangle. Now I'll just fill this in by pressing the G tool, making sure that contiguous is checked, and this will be the base for our head. Now the only amount of space that we need underneath our head is the neck and the top half of our chest or our torso. So we're just going to make sure that this rectangle that you've created is 7 pixels from the bottom. So if you just count from the bottom here, we'll just click on the pencil tool and we'll just make sure that we only have 7 pixels of distance from the bottom of our sprite. Okay, perfect. So now I can just select this with pressing M and just move this down so that we have exactly enough space for our character's portrait. Now, just like we've been doing with most of our characters, our head is not an exact rectangle. So I'll just erase off the 4 corners of our head, and that's going to create the shape before we get into shading. Now, the next task for creating the actual structure of our portrait is to create the neck. And honestly, all the neck is just a 12 pixel, 1 height line right across the head. If you're creating the line from the exact center of the head, just make sure you shift 1 pixel to the left. As when showing some perspective, we want to make sure that the front of our head is facing forward, so it should jut out slightly more than the backside. So again, counting our pixels, we should have 5 pixels on the left side and a 7 pixels distance from our right side. Finishing off, I'm just going to extend a couple pixels down across the bottom and just create another rectangle. And so we'll be using this as the shoulders, the top of the arm, and also the chest, as that's pretty much all we're going to be showing in this portrait image. Just filling the rest of this in, we now have the base for the shoulders and top of the torso, and we'll just start to shave off some of the pixels to create a rounded image. I'm taking off the 3 pixels in the corner on this side. Our shoulder will be shrugged slightly more on this side, as we want to show more of the arm. So instead, I'll actually be shaving off another set of staircased pixels. So technically, the base structure of this design is finished, and we actually have a perfect silhouette for our character portrait. But before we head into shading or adding any kind of eyes or details, just grab a quick black color and outline all the way around your image. There's not much to explain here other than the fact that this is just the style we've been working with most of our images so far. And also it will just help to create some separation from the background actually outlining your character. Okay, perfect. So how do we actually shade our head and body now that we have the base structure? Well, we want to head back and grab our darker shaded skin color, and we're going to mimic a similar look on how we did these main characters, just overemphasizing some of the shadows as we do have a bigger frame. We'll start by outlining the left side of the entire back of the head, and we're going to do the same thing but add a second outline from the back to once again show some more perspective that our face is looking on an angle, so the back of our head should be shaded more than the front. With the front, we're only going to be doing one outlining of shading, and we'll attach this by drawing the line all the way across the bottom of the neck. We can come back up and dot the corner pixels just so we can round off the shade. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We now have the shaded head. And for the neck, just like in our other sprites, our neck is going to be completely shaded as it is under the chin of our character. Well, I want to grab this shadow color again and come to the shoulder and just shade all the way across the left and right side of the character's shoulders. So from the left side, I'm going to count 7 pixels from the inside shading. And then we're going to create a line that is 3 pixels high, which will be the separation between the front arm and the chest of the character. Lastly, I'll make 2 diagonal lines across. And to signify that this is the chest piece, I'm going to shade all the way across the bottom of this side. Now all that's left to do is to take the middle of this chest piece and draw a line all the way across the top of the chest, just leaving some extra space leading from the neck to the chest. That is the full shading of our character's body. So the last thing to do is to actually create the eyes for this character. I'll start off by grabbing the white color to actually create the eyes, and we're going to make a rectangle for the 2 eyes. We want to make sure that the eye on the left side is actually one bigger than the one on the right, just because again, we're trying to show some perspective. Also, I'm keeping 3 pixels of width between the 2 eyes, as we do need some kind of bridge for the nose to create some separation. So the eye on the left is 7 pixels wide, and the eye on the right is going to be 6 pixels. I'll fill in the center with 2 height of black, and then I will create the actual color underneath the black all the way to the bottom of the eye. Again, just shading the outsides to add some more detail. And finally, we can add in the little shine or twinkle on the eyes by adding a dot of white on the top of the eyes, and finishing off by outlining around the top and corner of the eyes for the eyelashes. Shading is super simple. We're going to outline the left and bottom of both sides of the eyes, and we can fill in the 2 lines in the center where the bridge of the nose meets the front of the face. Perfect. So we have the eyes finished on our character, but real quick, before we end out this lecture, I want to quickly explain how I create simple backgrounds for my detailed portraits. All I did was take 2 green colors and made 4 diagonal lines across my canvas, filling the inside of both diagonal line pairs to create patternized, thick diagonal lines with my 2 green colors. And then I took 2 darker colors of both line shades to create a border around the background. Hopefully you can get creative and come up with a background of your own, but that's all there is today. So we've created our first little detailed character base. If I go back to home in the top left and click open file once again, I can open up some kind of character that we've used before. So for this example, I'm going to use the fighter character. So before we actually create the character's cosmetics, we have to break it down and try to understand what the portrait should actually show. Well, if we go back to our portrait view, we can see that we have the head, the neck, the shoulders, and the top of the torso in our image, meaning that these are the only features that we will be showing in our end result. I'm going to start with the headband first, so I'll grab the 2 colors. I want to use the darker or base color as my primary color, and then Alt right click to select our lighter highlight color as kind of our secondary color that we can use later on after we filled out the shape and structure of the headband. So moving back over to the portrait now, what I want to do to start is come up to the character layer and actually right click, new, and create a clothing layer. Okay, perfect. So once we have that selected, I have my colors ready to go. And I'm going to start by coming right from the tops of the eyebrows. And we're going to move up 2 pixels. And I'm going to draw a line all the way across. And this is going to be the base of this headband. And I'm going to extend this all the way up to the top so that we can create a little square across the entire head. But because I don't want this headband sitting exactly formed to the character's head, I will actually push up 1 pixel all the way up and do one more pixel height as well. Also, just to make it a little bit easier to see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the bottom left here where there's a little eye on the background. I'm going to select this eye just so that it hides the actual visual information on the background layer, just so you can see properly what we're actually working with. Now, again, just like we do with most of our images, we are going to round off this headband because it shouldn't be a complete square. So I'm just going to take off the 3 corner pixels here so we can smooth off this headband. So what we're going to do now is you're just going to pause the video and try to actually detail out this back portion of the headband or bandana or whatever you want to call it. So just make sure that you keep in mind you have to have some kind of curvature in here. We shouldn't have just like a straight on jagged headband, as it is made out of fabric and wrapped around the head's surface. And again, we have this kind of tie in the back, so maybe adding some kind of knot texture might be useful for the back of your image. So try it out for yourself. Just create the actual base structure before we get into actually highlighting this image. Okay, so now coming back to this, I'm going to do my own little example here. So I will just kind of wrap this around the head by curving over the head, and maybe we can even add a little bit more detail. Honestly, all I'm doing here is just slightly adjusting the actual structure of the bandana. I felt it was a little bit too flat, so I'm just bringing it out more on the left side and jutting it down a little bit lower on the head. Okay, so here's the finished structure that I ended up using for my bandana. And it's a little bit hard to see without any of the highlighting where you can see folds or anything like that. If you feel like you need it to be a little bit higher on the head, you could extend this entire headband up across the top to give a little bit of more volume to your image, but it's totally up to you. I actually personally like this better, so I'm going to stick with it. I think this is a better proportion. But heading into highlighting, how do we actually highlight this bandana? Well, following how we've been doing the highlighting and shading on the rest of the body, we want to keep the lighting to big blocks or clusters of highlights. So grabbing our highlight color, which I have selected on my right click, what I'll do is I'll just swap this over just by alt left clicking and grabbing this new lighter color. And what I'll do is I'll actually just go all the way around the top of this canvas and just highlight it pretty much just like a rounded off rectangle. It's extremely simple, but it gets across the point of where the front of the head is and kind of this flat surface before it starts to head backwards onto the top of the head. So when highlighting the back, the first thing I want to do is I want to actually show off this back piece. I'm going to highlight this kind of corner piece to show a portion of the knot. And I might actually extend this canvas down as well. I want to show the second or the other notch of the tied area at the back. So I'm going to skip down a couple pixels here, and I'll just dot this highlight here and extend this entire bandana down. So now we can see there's kind of these two pieces in the back here kind of folding over each other to create the actual highlights of the bandana. And of course, just like everything else we do, wherever there's exposed pixels, we're going to outline around the image. And it's super straightforward, but that's literally all we're gonna have to do for the bandana. So the next portion is creating the actual scarf for this character. And so again, I'm gonna go back to our platformer character and I'm gonna grab the two colors. I'll use the base color as our primary and the highlight color as our secondary. Come back over to our portrait and I'll just start designing a little scarf. I'm using the exact same rules that I used on the bandana. So really, I'm just going to draw a rectangle around the neck. And this is just a little bit of guesswork here on where the scarf should actually sit across the top of the chest and the neck area. But for the most part, I just want to get rid of the entire neck and have this start to curve down over the top of the shoulders. And then what we can do is we can just zoom in here and add two more notches, just like we did with the bandana. We can just kind of curve this off to again create the knot that we tie off on the scarf as well. So something like this works for me. And again, I want you to attempt to pause this video and try to highlight this scarf. Again, something to keep in mind is we do have two flaps or ties at the back of our scarf. Pause the video and I'll come back with my example. So here's how my approach went. So I went from the top right of the scarf and I highlighted the two diagonal pixels across the neck, skipped a line to dither a new highlight, and highlighted across the entire front face of the neck. Doing the same tactic, I skipped a diagonal line across and used this to dither across the rest of the highlight. And then basically I just split up the highlights on the two notches at the back of the scarf, again using this same technique of clustered pixels to show the proper form of our two notches. And there we go. I have a finished fighter character designed portrait that we based off of the fighter character that we created a few lectures ago. Before I start actually creating the character, I wanted to quickly change around the environment, so I made a new background for my mage character. So this is my example of creating the wizard character. Really, again, all we're doing here is just taking the concept of the main version of our character and trying to characterize the most important aspect. So again, you have the hat, the bushy eyebrows and gray hair, the character's gray beard, and of course the actual mage robe. I used the same techniques that I used in the bandana and scarf, where I'm only highlighting main surfaces to signify where the image faces forward or breaks off into separate pieces of fabric. Also, I thought it was a nice touch just to add some white dots into the robe, as we did do that on the character's main image, and of course the signature red eyes that I used on my mage.